Junior doctors reject a new contract with the government. It was thought a deal had been reached in May, but that deal is now off. Also, this lunchtime. Time for the Tories to decide. Voting has begun to choose the next Prime Minister. The pound falls to a new 31-year low, and Mark Carney warns Britain's financial stability is challenging after the Brexit vote. And they did it. Team Juno celebrate getting their spacecraft into Jupiter's orbit, describing it as the hardest thing NASA has ever done.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hussain.
Good afternoon. The junior doctors deal is off. In the last hour, they have rejected a new contract with the government. That was the contract agreed in a deal between the government and the doctors' union, the British Medical Association, in May. But that deal went to a vote and it didn't go the BMA's way. It comes, of course, after several junior doctors' strikes in a 2-year dispute over changing their hours and working conditions. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, joins me. This is a developing story. What can you tell us so far?
Well, it's come as a bit of a shock because it was only a couple of months ago, wasn't it, that we were saying that we thought this was probably all over. There were 10 days of talks between the BMA and the Department of Health back then with union involvement. It seemed that they'd managed to reach some new terms and conditions that both sides at that point were pretty optimistic that the junior doctors might agree to. Now, towards the end of last month, this was put to the vote and it came back today with yet another shock referendum result, with 58% voting against the new contract. Now, it's worth saying that is a far smaller majority on a much smaller turnout than the original vote in favour of going for strike action because of this contract. And I think possibly that underlines the fact that there is a growing sense of fatigue, not surprisingly, after 8 days of strike action, months of bitter dispute amongst some to prolong this even further. However, it has been rejected, and not surprisingly, given that, the chair of the Junior Doctors Committee, Johan Malawana, has decided to stand down. He said today the result of the vote is clear and the government must respect the informed decision junior doctors have made. Any new contract would affect a generation of doctors working for the NHS in England, so it's vital that has the confidence of the profession. Given the result, both sides must look again at the proposals and there should be no transition to a new contract until further talks take place.
Both sides looking again at the contract. What happens now, Rachel?
Well, it's very bad news for the NHS. We haven't had an official statement from the Department of Health yet, although speaking to sources close to the Health Secretary, there is a real sense of disappointment about this. It will be up to the new chair of the Junior Doctors Committee, whoever that is, we expect that to be announced within the next month or two, to decide how to go forward, whether to have more strike action. But the contract itself is due to start being introduced next month. So what do we have? The prospect of more industrial action with the teachers out on strike, economic instability. It's challenging times we live in, isn't it?
Isn't it just? Rachel Younger, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, Conservative MPs are right now casting their votes in the first ballot to choose their new leader and the country's next Prime Minister. Theresa May, Andrea Leadsom, Michael Gove, Stephen Crabb and Liam Fox are all standing in the contest. Tonight, the candidate with the least support will be eliminated ahead of the next 2 rounds of voting. Libby Vina has the latest.
Is this your new home? Journalists shouted as Theresa May arrived for Cabinet this morning. Possibly, but in this race, nothing is certain. Take the Justice Secretary, Michael Gove. Dubbed an assassin for taking down Boris Johnson last week, he appears to think he still has a chance. But the real threat to the Home Secretary comes from Andrea Leadsom, a former banker who's picking up support from MPs who voted leave.
And you're feeling confident?
Absolutely.
Her fellow Brexiter, Liam Fox, could be the first to be eliminated, but he's not quitting yet.
I've never thrown the towel in my entire life, and I'm not starting now, and I'm intending to fight for all the votes I can get. And I intend to continue to make the case that experience is important in all of this, because we live in a very dangerous world.
Among Cabinet colleagues, Theresa May is certainly the front runner.
Serious candidate for serious times.
But as one former front-runner knows, that isn't always an advantage.
So it's not guaranteed at this stage, of course, but the fact is she's been in the most difficult job in politics, Home Secretary, for a record length of time. She hasn't dropped the ball, done some difficult negotiations, carried the respect of the House through that, and is committed to getting a good deal out of Brexit.
Boris Johnson, meanwhile, says he's backing Andrea Leadsom.
Why didn't you pick Michael Gove?
Because Andrea Leadsom, I think, has got all the qualities that we need at the moment. She's got a lot of zap, a lot of drive, and all the experience. Plus, I think she can articulate what's needed at the moment, which is a bit of an antidote to some of the gloom and negativity and misunderstanding about what the Brexit vote means.
One Tory veteran says other issues matter too.
I want to know, what's your view of terrorism, war in Syria? How are you going to handle Putin? How are you going to reassure our friends in the world that we haven't just slightly taken leave of our senses?
A tall order for any candidate who wins this contest, and the keys to number 10. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party is holding emergency talks with trade union leaders to try to solve the party's conflict over the position of its leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Tom Watson hopes the meeting, which he's called the last throw of the dice, will result in a deal under which Mr Corbyn stands down. Let's join our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, at Westminster. Chris, could Mr Watson's plan work?
Well, it's a very good question. What's going to happen is either Jeremy Corbyn will choose to resign later this week or he'll face a leadership challenge. My sense is something is going to happen. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but certainly by the end of this week. And Mr Corbyn left home this morning, as he has done really for much of the last 10 days while his leadership has been under question. But he went to work. He's still the Labour leader today, and I very much suspect he'll still be the Labour leader tomorrow. What is happening today is that the Deputy Leader, Tom Watson, is throwing what he himself called the last throw of the dice, because he's meeting Mr Corbyn's union backers. Now, we know he's got a meeting with the boss of the Unite union, that's Britain's biggest union, the chap called Len McCluskey. I understand also he'll be speaking on the phone to other unions like Unison and the GMB, and he's going to try to get the unions to take away support from Mr Corbyn, to tell Mr Corbyn that perhaps his time is up. If that doesn't happen, then I think we will see the challenge.
Yeah, what happens if that plan, that last throw of the dice, does fail now?
Well, I think what will happen, and it's all about timing, because it all depends on what's going to happen tomorrow. There's a big event happening here tomorrow, and that is the publication of the Chilcot report, the inquiry into the Iraq war. It's MPs' belief, Labour MPs' belief, that Mr Corbyn has for so long wanted to give his response to that. They're prepared to allow him to do it, and then perhaps they might launch a challenge either from Angela Eagle, or the other name in the frame is Owen Smith. They might do that on Thursday.
Chris Shipp, thank you. The Governor of the Bank of England today relaxed banking sector rules, potentially freeing up as much as £150 billion to lend to households and to businesses. Mark Carney warned of the challenging times ahead following the vote to leave the European Union.
The number of vulnerable households could increase due to a tougher economic outlook and a potential tightening of credit conditions. In particular, there's growing evidence that uncertainty about the referendum has delayed major economic decisions, such as business investment, construction, and housing market activity.
Our economics editor, Norina Hertz, is here. You watched the whole speech. What else did Mr Carney have to say?
Well, Mr Carney made really clear that he remains very worried about the economy in the light of the EU referendum vote. He used the word uncertainty 30 times in his report. He talked about how challenging these times are. And he talked about vulnerable households, households that already are in debt, and said that the bank would be keeping a very close eye on them, but stressed that there is a limit to what the bank can do on its own in general.
Take us through what he said he can do, though, in terms of this lending that I mentioned.
So an area where he said he could make a difference and the bank could make a difference is trying to help banks lend more, trying to ensure that banks lend more. If you remember, back in 2008, after the financial crisis, banks just stopped lending. So what he's trying to do is help banks lend more. So he's reduced the cushion that they need to set aside and essentially freed up an additional £150 billion that banks can use to lend. But this raises two big questions. One, will banks in these uncertain times choose to lend more, or will they decide times are too risky, we want to sit tight? And will consumers, will households, will people, will small businesses, will they want to borrow more in these uncertain times? Or will they judge that things are just too risky? These are big questions.
This was a key speech, of course. How did the markets react to it?
Well, the markets already had a difficult day. The pound dropped to a 31-year low this morning off the back of fears primarily around the commercial property sector. And just in the last few minutes, we've had breaking news that Aviva has suspended trading in its £1.8 billion property fund as investors scramble to withdraw money out of the UK's commercial property sector. The pound started today in a tough place, and it looks like the day is only going to get tougher.
Yeah, the challenging times certainly do continue. Norina Hertz, thank you very much. Thank you. National SATs results for primary schools in England show that just over half of pupils met the new required standard in reading, writing and maths. The figures are the first since the introduction of new testing and a major overhaul of the curriculum in 2014. The Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, said the results shouldn't be compared with previous years and the majority of pupils had performed above the expected standard. Well, those results come on the day of a 24-hour teachers' strike. The walkout is affecting hundreds of schools across England. It's been organised by the National Union of Teachers in a long-running dispute over school funding. The NUT says school budgets aren't keeping pace with rising costs. Olivia Kinsley has the latest.
Protesting in their thousands at a situation they believe is damaging children's futures. They say the current school budget is leaving teachers overworked, classrooms overcrowded and subjects being dropped from the curriculum.
And when you're not listened to and you know that you're damaging children and hurting children through what you're being made to do, then you have no choice.
From Lancaster to Bristol, members of the largest teachers' union, the NUT, voted 9-1 in favour of going on strike, but that was on a turnout of just under 25%.
Nicky Morgan, save our schools, invest, don't cut.
The NUT claims the government is underfunding education.
Government is freezing the money it gives to schools per pupil, but increasing the money they take from schools. For every 20 teachers a school employs, out of static resources, they have to find a whole extra salary to give back to the Treasury.
But the government says it's spending billions more than when it came into power and that the strikes are just disruptive.
The strike is wholly unnecessary. This disrupts children's education, it inconveniences parents, and we are already in discussions with the unions, including the NUT, about the issues that they are raising. So there is absolutely no need for this strike action at all.
But try telling that to teachers who want change. Without it, they say education suffers. Olivia Kinsley, ITV News.
For 5 years, NASA scientists have been tracking the progress of its Juno spacecraft, and in the early hours of this morning, do or die became did it. As experts watched on nervously, Juno successfully locked onto Jupiter and now begins an 18-month mission of trying to unlock the planet's secrets, which could tell us more about Earth. The mission's chief scientist congratulated his team, saying, "You've just done the hardest thing NASA's ever done." Our science correspondent Alok Jha reports.
After 5 years and 1.7 billion miles, NASA's Juno spacecraft slipped into orbit this morning around the solar system's largest planet.
Juno, welcome to Jupiter.
Understandably, emotions were high.
NASA did it again. That says it all to me. And I am so happy to be part of the team that did that. I mean, this team has worked so hard, and we have just such great people. And it's almost like a dream coming true right here.
When it arrived at Jupiter in the early hours of this morning, Juno was travelling at more than 40,000 miles per hour relative to the giant planet. To get into orbit, it had to slam on the brakes by burning its engine for exactly 35 minutes. A misfire would have ended the mission. But now Juno is close enough to the planet to investigate how much water and oxygen it holds. and look beneath Jupiter's clouds to discover what lies in the planet's core. As well as scientific instruments, the probe is also carrying Lego figures of Jupiter, his wife Juno, and the astronomer Galileo.
It's amazing. I mean, the more you know about the mission, you know just how tricky this was, and to have it be flawless. I mean, I really can't put it into words. You imagine what it might feel like, but to actually have it, to know that we can all go to bed tonight, not worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow, it's pretty awesome.
Juno sent this as it approached Jupiter last week, but its first close-up pictures won't appear until next month. It'll then orbit the planet for almost 2 years, before finally disappearing into Jupiter's clouds. Alok Jha, ITV News.
The Duke of Cambridge has urged the country to stand up to bullying, calling it stupid, cruel and unrelenting. He's released a video message in support of the first ever National Stand Up to Bullying Day. It was created by the Diana Award charity, which aims to empower young people. Prince William also stressed that bullying can affect adults too and encouraged everyone to challenge it.
Bullying is an issue which can affect any one of us, regardless of age, background, gender, sexuality, race, disability, or religion. It exists all around us, in people's homes, in their workplaces, and in their wider communities. Research shows that victims of bullying can become more susceptible to depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts, and experience difficulties in maintaining healthy relationships. This cannot be allowed to continue.
The chief executive of the Diana Award, Tessie Ojo, joins us now, as does the actor Christopher Eccleston, who is also involved in the campaign. Thank you both for joining me this lunchtime. Christopher Eccleston, you have spoken recently about the fact you were a bully at school. What, looking back, do you think made you do that at the time?
Well, it's interesting that it was picked up that I was a bully, because I was actually bullied on 2 occasions, once by a girl, once by a boy, for a prolonged period. In fact, much longer than I was bullied, but the gutter press chose to concentrate on what I did latterly. I feel a lot of shame about it, of course, but I was also a victim, and this isn't a public therapy session for me. This is about, we're not talking about the perpetrators, we're talking about the victims, and it can happen on the internet, it can happen at school, it can happen in the workplace. It can happen country on country, and we'll probably get a lot more of it now we've exited Europe.
It is very brave of you to admit to it, and often people who are bullied do become bullies, though. Do you think that what you have said will mean that people really listen? Because often celebrities back campaigns with no real sense of empathy.
Well, I would hope so. I did have a sense of empathy, because what happened to me as a 5-year-old when I was bullied by a 7-year-old girl, and I have to say, God knows what was going on with that girl at home. I feel like she was suffering much more than me, but I was absolutely terrified. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to go out in the playground. So yes, I can empathise with a child who's watching this now, who is terrified and whose life is a misery.
Tessie, it has such a dramatic impact on a child when they go to school. It is also happening to adults. Do you think this is something that is unreported, that we just don't talk about what happens in offices and in factories?
Absolutely. You know, we as a society, we've almost come to accept bullying as a rite of passage. And I think that's one of the things we want to focus on with the Stand Up campaign, that bullying should not be accepted. It's not a rite of passage. It's not character building. And also, it's our collective responsibility to tackle it.
Christopher, you're agreeing with that. What should we do if we are in that situation as a parent or as somebody in a workplace to challenge it? If the head teacher, if our boss isn't listening?
What's very difficult when you're bullied, from my experience, is, as I was brought up not to tell tales. I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to tell tales. Also because I was terrified of my father's reaction in particular, because he'd have probably knocked the school down. So there are lots of very subtle issues. But if you are scared about becoming a telltale, don't think of the fact that you're a victim. Think that this bully may go on and bully somebody else, and hopefully that will spur you on to alert somebody in a position of authority. You're not telling tales, you're saving other people's suffering.
Tessie, very briefly, sage advice there.
Absolutely. It's about never keeping silent. One of the key things we want to do with the campaign is educate young people. And today, for example, at Facebook, we are launching a toolkit on how young people can report bullying incidences. So the key thing about the campaign is, firstly, we all have a responsibility. It's on all of us. And being a bystander simply makes us part of the problem.
Tessie, OJ, thank you very much. And this is the first day of an annual campaign. Christopher Eccleston, thank you very much too. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Finally, Wales and their incredible performances at Euro 2016 have been the story of the summer so far. Tomorrow, the team face Portugal in the semi-final in Lyon, surely the biggest game in their history. Our sports editor, Steve Scott, watched the players train this morning. Steve, they'll be missing some key players tomorrow, though, through suspension. Will they cope?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. It's a suspension, not injury, because UEFA have this strange rule, don't they, where in the first 5 games, 2 yellow cards, and you've got to sit out 1 match. One of the players missing, Aaron Ramsey, he's been key to Wales so far. He was instrumental in dismantling Belgium in the last game. Ben Davies misses out as well. Chris Coleman's got a lot of people to choose from. He's got strength and depth. I expect James Collins and Andy King to come in. Portugal will start this game as favourites, not for their form, but mainly because they got a lot of big tournament experience. Form-wise, remember, they haven't even won a game inside 90 minutes. But the fact that they're starting as favourites won't concern Wales at all. A lot of people are pitching this as Bale against Ronaldo. I don't really see it that way. I think the victor tomorrow night will be the team that copes with the occasion better. And Wales haven't struggled to cope with anything so far.
Steve Scott, enjoy the football. Thank you. A reminder of our top story this lunchtime. Junior doctors in England have voted to reject a new contract agreement with the government. In the last few moments, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has said their decision was extremely disappointing. We'll have much more on that a lot later. That's it this lunchtime, though. Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale will be here with the ITV Evening News from me and everyone here for now. Bye-bye.